Hi, everybody. My name's Dr. Zlakin, and I'm here to talk to you today about interpersonal communication. So let's get started, shall we? Share my screen with you. So welcome to my presentation today. My name is Dr. Zlakin. This is the way you would mostly start any formal presentation, with your introduction. So what I have here is an image that takes us right into the deep end of what we mean when we say interpersonal communication. So rather than referring to a speaker and a listener, you'll notice that both people are referred to as the source of messaging, which is an encoded message, and the receiver of a message, which they then need to decode. So this is a little more nuanced and complicated, I would say, than what I spoke to you about in the rhetorical situation. The one word that I think may give us a little bit of trouble, unless you've had a communications course already, is this idea of feed forward. We're pretty familiar with feedback, right? Feedback is you've received a message and you're providing your perspective on it as you provide the source of that information feedback. The feed forward is the intention and the message that the source actually comes into the room with. So while feedback looks back on the message, feed forward is looking ahead to the message. And that's how that's working. Keep in mind that, what we said during the rhetorical situation is that a lot of times the message that you intend is not necessarily the message that is received. And that's why this language about encoding and decoding is really important. That language also includes, say, tone, body language, things that are happening outside of actually the words that are being used. So in that sense, it's a little more inclusive of a term. I wanted to slow us down a little bit, though, before I move forward and just talk about the word interpersonal. Because the prefix inter is typically just to mean in between two people, and you still have this text right there in the middle between you. But it also means mutual and reciprocal. And this is a little different when you're talking about the spoken word, right? Because it's not a text necessarily. It's things that you're actually saying to a person. And a lot of this is improvisational because you're reading the other person's body language. You're getting messaging from them, even though they're listening. So keep this in mind as a listener. You're always also communicating. You may not be the person speaking in the room, but you are communicating, right? And the same for the speaker. If you're really going to be able to speak well, you're going to have to always be reading the body language, listening to what people are saying, not necessarily in the language, right? Because they're listening to you, but perhaps in other forms of communication through their body language and their facial expressions. So what you're really trying to do for communication to work is to create this kind of exchange, yes, between two people, but that is mutually experienced and enriching, and that is reciprocated through both of you at all times. So the root word personal just means it affects you as a person. And typically we don't think of the personal as having anything to do with our professional career or our work life. In fact, a lot of times we're even told to leave our personal lives outside of the classroom or outside of work, because you don't want that emotion to kind of take over the messaging to a point where you're unable to read other people in the room and respond to them. in a way that they can connect with or communicate your message and intent with them and code it well enough that they can receive that message. So I think that's really where that idea comes from. But I would say that there's no one on campus, no professor in particular, on campus who doesn't care about their research in some way, doesn't feel attached to their research in some way. This is work that we do take home with us. We're rather passionate about it. Just ask a professor about their research, and I'm sure many of us would just love to talk about it. So it is personal, right? But it's this idea of not letting that personal kind of overwhelm your ability to read your audience, to be listening, to be attentive to them and attentive to what they need from you in order to receive the message. So I think this is a lot of times what we think of when we think of interpersonal communication. Now, I love this image because they're reading a text together or looking at an image together on a phone. So there is this written text outside of them, but all the messaging we're getting as the audience comes from their body language and their facial expressions. We know looking at this message and looking at this image that these two know each other, they care about each other, they've known each other for a long time, they're good friends, there's a lot of love here, and yet they're just looking and reading a text. So there you can see in this image kind of the mutuality. They're both sitting similarly up against each other, kind of pressing into each other, and so you can see that kind of reciprocated holding up of each other, or creating kind of a wall for the other person to lean up against. And so I really love that image just because it really gets at this idea of what we mean by interpersonal. And all the messaging, even for us as the audience, has nothing to do with the words on the screen. It has everything to do with the nonverbal communication and the facial expressions that we're seeing. So interpersonal communication, nonverbal, has to do with those facial expressions, the body language, the posture, whereas verbal has to do with what's coming out of the mouth, the sounds, the language, the tone of voice, which communicates so much. Two people can say the same words and mean totally different things, and you know what they mean when you hear it. The important thing to remember is that there's always also oral communication, listening and hearing, not just to the verbal communication, but also to the nonverbal communication. And you really need that ability to be able to communicate well. So this is why I'm thinking in class discussions, the listening skills are just as important as the skills of speaking. Because if you're speaking without listening or reading your room, you're not necessarily connecting with anybody in the room or making sure that you're presenting that message in a way that they're going to be able to receive it. You have to have kind of the sense of the audience when you're say leading a class discussion, for example. So I would kind of emphasize that. Now, these are two examples of academic professional conferences, and both of these are conferences that are held at NKU every year. On your right, you will see an image of Professor Goddard, who is a psychology professor here at NKU, presenting her scholarship at Spotlight on Scholarship, which is a conference every year for NKU faculty. She does a lot of research into addiction, specifically heroin addiction, and this is her presenting her research, I think, in 2018. Now, if you look on your left, you'll see on the far left side of the image, you'll see a student presenting her scholarship at Celebration, which is a student conference at NKU that happens every year. And that's something we'd love to see you participate in. This is an image of a different kind of presentation than what you see Professor Goddard participating in. She's giving an oral presentation. This student is giving a poster presentation at a poster forum. It's a little different. You present your research on the poster. You prepare about 5 minutes to say to people who come up to your poster and take a look at it. So there's a shorter presentation. Professor Goddard would speak at least 20 minutes. Whereas at a poster forum, you usually only take 5. And then it becomes much more of a conversation after that, where people ask questions about information that you've shared with them orally, but also that they see visually on the poster. So the poster forum's a bit more conversational, but still a professional, formal setting. Whereas what you see Professor Goddard doing, where she's giving an oral presentation at a conference, lasts a little longer, and obviously there's usually a PowerPoint of that. And she would also have questions at the end of a longer presentation, but those questions wouldn't necessarily last as long as the poster forum. So oral interpersonal communication really is a practice. It's something that you're doing all the time as you communicate with other people. So this is something you already really know how to do. And what Honors 101 offers you is the opportunity to practice that practice in more formal settings so that you can feel more comfortable as you present in future academic and professional realms. So you will have the chance to practice this professional and academic oral interpersonal communication during every Honors 101 class in discussion, whether that discussion is happening on discussion board, in Zoom, in a chat room on Teams, doesn't really matter. You're always, if you think about it, kind of reading the messaging that's coming, not just in the language that's being used or how words are being spoken or somebody's tone, but also kind of in the body language that you're getting and other types of messaging like facial expressions. The other way that you'll be able to practice is we actually have a practice conference for our Honors 101 students where you will be able to give a short presentation or poster presentation to other 101 students in attendance and honors professors. And after your presentation, whether it's a poster presentation or an oral presentation, you will have the opportunity to listen to questions from people who attended your presentation and respond to them and experience that more improvisational side of formal communication that happens orally as you respond to the questions you receive about research. So that is my presentation on oral interpersonal communication in academic and professional settings. My name again is Dr. Slacken. It has been wonderful to spend some time with you today. I hope you enjoyed my video presentation and my interpersonal communication skills. Break the fourth wall, everybody. Take care, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.